I'm very excited to be talking to you about how to transform your finance team from number crunchers to business partners. Thank you, Jonathan. My name is Tim Schöler. I'm the CFO for Mercedes-Benz Retail Group here in the UK. As you can guess from my accent, I'm German. I'm trying to be the bigger person, so congratulations on last night. Well done, and I think it explains why a few tables are left empty. I'm sure they will come later on. All right, let's jump into it. Quick agenda. So first of all, I would like to talk about my motivation. Why am I passionate about transforming the business team? Then the main event will be chapter 2, where we'll talk about how to transition your team. And I use transition here rather than transform, because transform sounds very quick, but it takes time, it's incremental changes, and we will get to that. On my journey with my team, there were a few side steps. One of them was centralising the team, and I want to talk about that, how this is a positive thing, but also a negative thing, and how this is actually linked to this transition or transformation. A nice little excursus to your core values, because you can link your core values and the transformation, which is quite handy. And then last but not least, I would like to talk about how to strike a balance with your board, because at the end, we are business partners to our board as CFOs and FDs, and how do we actually strike a balance between supporting and actually being persistent. And then at the end, I hope you do have a lot of questions, and then we can have a little bit of a discussion. So, how did I become passionate about this change? When I was still studying, so some years ago, I was doing an internship in the marketing department of a big German company. And it was towards the year end, where I was asked, Tim, can you just help us carry some boxes of marketing material to that room? So we're carrying marketing materials all day into an empty room, lock the door. And when we locked the door, I asked, what are those brochures for? What are you going to do? Is that for the next season? And they looked at me and said, no, they are old brochures. We just bought them because if we don't spend our budget for this year, then the financial controller is going to take it away from us for next year. And looking around, a lot of you are nodding and smiling. That is something that we do encounter. So what I've learned from this little example is there was no communication between the functional department and the finance team. Therefore, there's no understanding from the finance team that the marketing department may need the money next year, but not this year. And they just looked at numbers saying, oh, well, you underspent in 2019, therefore you can underspend in 2020 as well. So that is kind of where I'm coming from. And at that point, I was a marketing intern. I didn't have any ambition to go into finance, but for me, this is where it clicked. I do want to make a difference, because I think most of us are here because we hate wasting money. Not trying to sound stingy, but we would like to add value for the company. We don't want to just spend money for the sake of spending, and we want to make sure that it actually is going to use. And this is why I'm really passionate about it, and this is why I actually, in my career, always have been trying to go to a business partnering approach. Going to a few examples just to see if they resonate with you, if that is something that you've heard before. So let's say you present something, you present to your sales director and you say, I think I have an idea how we can make this more efficient. They will look you deadly in the eye and say, well, you've never been in sales. You don't know what you're talking about. And let's dissect that for a second, because actually what they are saying is, I hear you, you make a valid point, but I'm supposed to be the expert in that field, and I can't take your recommendation because that would make me look weak. Therefore, I just use an easy exit. I'm saying, well, you don't know. You have never been in sales. How would you know? Then the second one is also a bit of a tricky one, and I'm sure you've heard that as well before. You have one of your operational directors saying, I don't really know why we're not on target. Well, just ask Cheryl and what she has done with her accounting team. So what they're referring to is it's not their numbers, it's not their financials. So they don't have to understand their financials. They're just focusing. I'm focusing on sales. I'm a sales director. No, you're in charge of the bottom line as well. You're there to add value to the company. But therefore, they just deflect this, and they just put it on Cheryl and her team, saying well, I don't know. They do their black magic, and I've got nothing to do with me. And then the last one is, okay, Dave, you run the numbers, and we will decide. And the we doesn't include poor Dave in that example, because what quite often happens, and I've seen it throughout my career, is you sit in a board meeting, there's a CFO, everybody's discussing, all operational directors are discussing, and then they just look at Dave, say, Dave, you make a business case, and then we will decide. So they exclude Dave, saying, you're just a numbers cruncher, you're just put in a box, you got nothing to do with the operations. And that's, I'm not sure if those resonate with you, but for me, I've seen something like this a lot throughout my career. I've heard it from a lot of people I've been talking to. And this is something I'm very passionate about, to fight that, to actually make sure we all work together as a team to actually add more value to the business. Good, well, let's jump into the main topic. So I will spend most of the presentation on the second chapter. Oh, my apologies. Did need to double click, so apologies. So what are business partners in finance? Is that a new trend? Is that something that has existed longer? Well, we all know business partner usually from HR. We've heard it a lot of times. Most HR functions now have HR business partners. And the idea was HR needed to be incorporated or included into the entire business, and therefore add more value to the business by understanding how the business works, and therefore then supporting the business as best as they can. On the finance side, and I'm quite curious to find out a little bit more about you later in discussions, there's not that many people yet that are called dedicated business partners. There's more and more, so if you're going now on Indeed or LinkedIn, you will find 100 job ads in the UK for finance business partners, but I guess in most functions it's fairly unheard of still. In Germany, we do separate usually between accounting and controlling, and for us, controlling is what you would most likely translate into management accountants. So this is something where you actually steer the business, where you benchmark, where you do all of that. There's also, on the educational sector, you can see that there is more and more finance degrees which are actually including the words business partnering, but it is still very, very early doors, so you won't see much of that. The overall idea is you want to go away from back office to become part of the business. Doesn't matter if that is a business partner in finance or in HR or wherever. It's the idea that we need to work together as one team to bring the company forward. So what is a business partner in finance? For me, there's a few points on that slide, but there are a few, like two of them are very, very important for me. For me, the first one is you want to link your finance team, your finance department with the operations. You want them to be part of their team as much as part of the finance team. But I always say there shouldn't be any us and them, there should be a joint us. And I know it is easy to say that in a presentation, and it's so much harder to live it in real life, and we'll see that later on. It is a long journey. But how do you actually get there? For me, the number one priority here is excellent interpersonal skills. And I'm sure you all have been working in the finance side of the business for a long time, and you most likely have seen accountants who have been doing this for 30 years, and they have been locked in a room and been put in the numbers box, and they have been fulfilling this role of being in a numbers box. Therefore, maybe, so no offense, but maybe some of them may lack the excellent interpersonal skills. What do I mean by interpersonal skills? The idea is to really be a partner to the operational colleagues, and for that you need to be very open, you need to make yourself very vulnerable. Talk about this later as well. What is the idea, what the business partner can add to the business? I think the main topic is to provide insights, not just dump data on your colleagues. I've seen, in my career, I've seen management reports which were black and white print, 70 pages. Have you seen something like this? And then you hand it over to your business partners, to your operational partners, and they look at it as like, well, I'm not really sure what to do with this. So the idea is you want to create reports and you want to create benchmarking. You want to simplify complexity. You have all the data, you have all the knowledge, but you need to narrow it down to a few key points that people actually can work with. And sometimes it's as easy as using some color. Like if the 70 pages are at least green and red, if they're positive or negative, does help a little. It's the small things. Put in some graphs to show different sides, how they're actually comparing as a benchmark against each other. And then another one, which is, I think, quite trending right now, is the growth-focused mindset. For me, I'm going to very oversimplify what that means to me. For me, a growth-focused mindset means I see there is a problem, and I know I can learn the skills to get to solve this problem. It is the belief that you can overcome whatever you want to overcome, rather than saying, oh, well, we've never done this, I'm not going to touch it. Then I mentioned outcome-oriented as well. And for me, outcome-oriented is that you take out the personal component of it. It's not saying, you have done something wrong, you have done something wrong. It is about saying, we do have a problem, and we would like to solve this problem. Let's focus on the outcome. I'm not interested in finger pointing. It's not getting you anywhere. And ultimately, if all of these points are fulfilled, the finance business partner should be part of the decision-making process. No more, Dave, you run the numbers, we'll decide. It will be, Dave, you looked at the numbers. What's your opinion? What do you want to talk about? What should we decide? Before I continue, can I have a show of hands of how many of you think that they could increase or improve their business partnering approach within their department? Okay, that's a few. Can I rephrase that question? How many of you believe that your operational colleagues think that your team could improve being a business partner? Yeah, it's a few more, isn't it? So I think quite often we think, yes, we are already there, but if we actually are open for feedback and ask our operational colleagues, they may tend to disagree. And what you just did there is you went out of your comfort zone. You just admitted that maybe you think you don't need to change it, but your colleagues do think, oh, I'm actually not do. Tell me next time if I didn't click, sorry. So what you did is you left the comfort zone. You admitted that actually your colleagues have higher expectations of your finance team than you may have yourself. So that's a very, very good point. You already started the journey. You left the comfort zone, you admitted you need to do something. What you did there is you made yourself vulnerable. And I think we all need to do this more often in business context. We all make mistakes, we're all human. But we need to push ourselves to allow that for other people to see that we're vulnerable, because that will always help. So that is how you leave the comfort zone for yourself. But how does that impact other people? It impacts your team. Because basically what you're saying is, well, you have been an accountant for 30 years. What you have been doing is not good enough anymore. Of course, you would never phrase it like this, but this is how they will perceive it. So you will need to be very, very clear that this will provoke some emotions in your team. And we will talk about this later on, and I said it at the beginning, it won't be an easy change. It's not something you switch on, you change the job title of someone, and they're a business partner. Well, it's on the paper, it should be fine. No, it will take a lot of work. And then ultimately, it is also leaving the comfort zone for your operational colleagues. Why is it leaving the comfort zone for them? You're offering something new to them. Why would that make them leave their comfort zone? Well, as I said earlier, they quite often would use the easy defense saying, well, it's not my numbers, we've got nothing to do with it. You actually put them in charge. You make them responsible for their figures. There's no more excuses, nothing to hide from anymore. So actually, even for them, there's work and effort going in. Therefore, also they need to leave their comfort zone. And ultimately, if you do it right and you provide insight and benchmarking, they will also need to change their operations because they are not perfect. Everyone can improve, but you need to admit it first. So this is a long journey. And you need to make sure that all the three groups that I've just mentioned are on board from the beginning on. It's no good that you now start writing down what your strategy is to do the business partnering. You go back in a few weeks to work, you put it in front of your team and your operational colleagues and say, this is what we're going to do. You already lost them, but we'll talk about this in a second. And then my last point here, and also linked to the nice picture, is something what I'm passionate about as well, is I'm a runner. And I want to really, really stress this. This whole transformation or transition is a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's not something you can switch on like a tap. It will take a lot of time. Good. So jumping into it, when I did this journey, and your journey may look different, we're all coming from different backgrounds, we have different starting points. But what I did at the beginning is I needed a bit of a structure. I'm not good in just doing things. I needed a bit of structure, so I thought about what could I do? And I came up with this little structure. So we'll talk about all the pillars in a second. So we'll talk about communication, about planning, training, adaptation, but ultimately about the overarching transformation vision. And vision is a very big word, but let's jump into what that actually means. So for me, a vision is really, really important to link to the 3 questions I put on here. The why. Why do you have this vision? It is not because headquarters told you that you need to change your finance team. No, you have a vision, you want to change something. You're passionate about something. Maybe you have a story to tell that you've experienced. Like I had at my introduction, told you about this experience. This made me wanting to be a business partner to the business all the time. What is the origin of it? Do you have any examples? Bring it to life. Just writing down a vision is very simple, but you need to bring it to life. The what? Well, that's the content. For me, it was I want my finance team or our finance team to add more value to the business. Very simple, very vague. Could mean nothing, could mean a lot. And I think a vision needs to be broad. I think what we quite often do when we define something, we go into details and kind of already map out the strategy and try to put it all into one sentence, and then nobody will ever be able to tell you what the vision is. They will always forget it. It's very, very complicated. Keep it short and simple. It doesn't need to be about adding more value. It can be about something else, but keep it very simple so everybody knows what you're talking about. And now talking about people again, the who. Who is going to be involved? And we already touched on the stakeholders earlier. And then how will they benefit from it? Because I said on the last slide, it is leaving the comfort zone for all parties involved, yourself, your team, your operational colleagues. You need to make sure that they know what they gain from it. For yourself, I think you already know what you're gaining from it, otherwise you wouldn't start it. But for your team, you need to show them what is in it for them. So for example, some accountants feel left out of the decision making. It's like, oh, they decided that, but that's not what I would have proposed. Show them that they can be in charge, that they actually can make a difference, that some people want to make a difference. People don't come to work to just crunch some numbers and go home. They want to be part of something. For your operational colleagues, it should be very clear why it is good to have you as business partners, but it's also an intrusion of their area of expertise. So map out for them how you can help them, how you can improve their lives, how they can easier reach their targets, how they can easier understand the benchmarking between their sites instead of just doing it with a gut feeling like, oh, I know this site always messes something up. No, you will have facts, you will have something to look at. Communication. I think the first point says it all. Communication is key, no matter what you do, and this got nothing to do with this presentation, just in general. I'm sure you have had employee surveys in the past somewhere, and the number one criticism will always be a lack of communication. Whatever that means. It is very, very, very broad statements. Usually you don't get to the bottom of it in a survey, but communication is something that is upsetting to everyone if it's done wrong. If it's done right, you don't really get told like, oh, that's great communication, but if it's done wrong, people will feel left out and they won't work with you. So you need to make sure that all your stakeholders are always involved. You need to make sure that the vision that we are just talking about is their vision, not just yours. You always need to keep everyone in the loop. Because as we talked about it earlier, if you lose the people or if you don't convince the people to actually step out of their comfort zone, you don't have the buy-in that you need. You don't get the input, the feedback that you need, because you can't do that. This is not a one-person show. This is about transforming an entire team, transforming an entire business. And this feedback that you need from your team, from your operational colleagues, this is not something you just need at the beginning of this journey, where you say, okay, how should we actually tackle that? And then you implement this and that's never heard of it again. No, you need it during the implementation. You need to see if actually what you're talking about is actually what they wanted in the first place. You need it after the implementation. Constant feedback. Communication is key. Talk about it, talk about it, talk about it. Because, and that's my last point here, rather over-communicate than under-communicate. How many times have you heard from an employee that they're upset because they haven't been copied into an email of Very, very marginal topic, isn't it? But they feel left out. Don't make sure that you don't have anyone who feels left out. Make sure everybody is included. So how do we then set up a plan? Just talked about communication and feedback. I'm a massive believer of feedback. You need to make yourself vulnerable to receive that feedback, because ultimately at the beginning what you will get is, no, I don't like how this is working. Oh, you've never done this. It will be a bit of this. Take this as something positive. If people share it with you now, you can act on it, you can make it better. If people just say it behind your back because you never ask for it, not great. Make yourself vulnerable and make sure that you always ask for feedback, and then have this as the base for your plan, because then you can list all the things that your business partners or your operational colleagues, your team has said. You can list all of this and then make a first step. And what is really important, I think, with no matter what project you start, if it is a long project, you need some quick wins at the beginning. You need something that convinces the people that it's worthwhile to actually follow through this entire painful process where there are ups, but also a lot of downs. So you need to find some quick wins. But if you take feedback at the beginning and you list all the things that people want to change, sometimes it's as easy as we said earlier. Put some red and green into your management accounts. It's a quick win. The management accounts will change later anyway, but start with something small. Say, look, we've done something. Don't overdo it because, well, you just changed the colors, but something for the people to see. When we talk about laying out a timeline for this project, ask your team for feedback. Don't say like, I need this done by the end of the year. If we're not doing this, we will lose everyone. No, ask your team what they think is achievable, because it's not just their vision, it should also be their strategy. And if you put a timeline on something that they don't believe on, you will never get anywhere. Something I believe is really important is to actually document all the steps and actually also the responsibilities, because if you talk about a vision at the beginning, which is very fluffy and vague and hard to grasp, you need to make sure that you have something tangible, and you're also, not everyone is talking in a group discussion about, oh yeah, we should do this, we should do that. Who is doing this? When are they doing it? Write it down and make sure there is something actually that you can have some touch points on to understand how it's going and that you're actually moving forward. Once you have this timeline, feel free to share it with your stakeholders, with your operational colleagues, because they want to know what's happening. They need to be included, because here, once again, you don't want to just prepare something and then just dump it on their table and run away and say, well, that's it. No, you want to be in a discussion with them. So give them a bit of a feeling what the timeline looks like. Let's talk about training for a second. Well, we already touched on it, that it needs excellent interpersonal skills, for example. I'll touch it at the end, sorry. When you start getting feedback from your team about what needs to be implemented, you can also ask them, do you feel comfortable implementing these things, or where do you think there is something you will struggle with? Because a lot of your people will know why they are not business partners right now. Maybe they don't have the confidence, maybe they don't have the Excel skills, whatever it may be. With this feedback you get from your team to see where the bottlenecks, skill bottlenecks for them are, overlay this feedback from your team with your own opinions and also with the feedback from your business partners. But then don't make the mistake to have this whole session in a group session. Do one-to-one, sit down with every person individually and say, like, I really want you to grow as a person on this one. I think there are some topics that we can work on. You yourself already told me you would like to work on this. I think there's something else you could benefit from. Talk about it, but make it private. You don't want to do this in front of a group, because that will agitate people. And then if there are formal trainings, like just, you need to learn how to set up a PowerPoint or an Excel course, book the training. That's easy. That's a quick win as well, saying like, we are upskilling our people. But try to use them also as multiplicators. So what we always try to do is when somebody in our team takes a training course, the week after they come back to our weekly meeting and they just in 5 to 10 minutes summarize what they've learned from the course, which is beneficial for them because they need to recap what they've learned. And it's also beneficial for the other ones because they can learn from the key points that they have been taken away from that training. And then ultimately, when we talk about interpersonal skills, I think that is the number one priority. You need to make sure that people are open, that they talk to their colleagues. How many times have you told somebody, just call your operational colleagues, and 5 minutes later you see them sending an email? It's like, no, you didn't call them. For many people, this is outside their comfort zone, but they need somebody to help them with. It is not good enough just saying, well, stop being shy, right? So what you do need, and I'm a big believer in mentoring, find somebody outside of the F&C function who's not in any way related as a line manager or anything. Find somebody as a mentor who's experienced, who's good in that specific skill you want to foster in your employee, and buddy them up. Mentoring is also a sign of appreciation. Every employee I've ever mentored or had mentored was very grateful for it. It is great, it doesn't cost you a penny, and it makes a massive difference. Then, ultimately, you need to stay open-minded and flexible, because now you've set out a plan, you've set out a strategy, it all looks rosy, and then something happens. I don't know, a pandemic kicks in. May delay a few things in your strategy. That's okay. Be flexible and adapt to it. But what you shouldn't be doing is you kick it off and then let it run by itself. You need to make sure you have weekly touch points to make sure that everybody knows it's at the top of your agenda. It's not something that can wait after month end. It can only be a 10 minutes, like 10 for 10 at Friday morning, whatever, but talk about it constantly. Otherwise, you can't adapt if there are some changes. Also, what we quite often tend to do when we kick off a big project, we make great commitment and we tell our operational colleagues, oh, we will do this and we'll be so much better, and then they never hear from it again. Give them regular updates about what is happening. This is also important for your team to see that they actually have successes and they can celebrate that success that they had. And as I said, at the beginning, you start with quick wins, changing some colors, putting a graph in. Easy. Talk to your counterparts in the operations about that. Well, if something isn't working, be honest. Nothing is perfect from the start. If something isn't working, go ahead and change it. There's no point of just like chasing something that is not happening. If for example, IT doesn't have the capability to set up whatever report you like, fine, then this report isn't happening. That doesn't mean your vision is compromised. It just means you're flexible and you're actually adapting it to the circumstances that you encounter. Which is the ultimate point on this slide. Don't be afraid to adapt. Don't be afraid to change and be flexible. So that was my journey. So that was the main part on how to transform your finance business team. And on my journey, I counted a few other things, because at the same time I changed everyone to finance business, but not everyone, but some of them, into finance business partners. We were also centralizing our teams. So as a bit of a background, so I work for Mercedes-Benz Retail Group. We own 15 dealerships across London, and we had a site accountant at every site. And we said, oh, that's horribly inefficient. Let's all bring them together and have a centralized team. So let's talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's always easy to talk about the good because there's a lot of benefits to it. But no matter when you change your strategy, there's also a downside. So we'll talk about this on the next slide. One of the major problems that we had before we actually centralized is, yes, everybody knows IFRS. We all should work to the same standards. But ultimately, there's a bit of leeway here and there, and there's different ways of looking at numbers. So no matter what we did, every site did something differently. We, of course, tried centrally to avoid that, but after the centralization, it was so much easier. Everybody was in the same building, and you could talk about the standards. You could make one person responsible for one GL, and you really had the focus on making sure the standard was across the group. It also really helped with the communication, because beforehand there was no belonging of being part of the finance and controlling team. It was just like, yeah, well, I'm part of the Dartford dealership, for example. Now it was like, oh, yeah, we are a finance team, we have an identity, which really helped me to focus them also on the joint vision, adding more value. That it was something, doing this across all sites and wouldn't have worked, but having everyone at the same place was really helpful. And it doesn't have to be the same place as we've seen in the pandemic. All my team work remote, and they will continue to do so. But it is how you team people up, how they actually belong to a group, and how they actually feel in that group. For all the number crunches and bean counters today, we also had like a lot of cost savings. So we saved, I think, around 15 to 20% of our overheads in the finance team, which is not a bad shout if you're looking for some money. And one of the things we also got back from some employee surveys was the turnaround time of decisions increased a lot. Because if you have somebody sitting somewhere else or not really being part of the team, it's so much easier not to respond or not to make a decision. If you have everyone under one umbrella at the same table, virtually or physically, it's so much quicker to say, yeah, we're going to do that, and we move forward with that. So that is the positive, that's the good, but there's also the bad and the ugly. If you're just in charge of one area, a few GLs or whatever it may be, you have less sense of ownership. If you're in charge of an entire dealership, you feel part of that dealership, and you would say, yes, I represent them and I have ownership. So that was something we needed to really transform them to have ownership of the functions they were looking after. So people were looking after new cars or used cars, parts, service, vans, whatever, to make sure that they are striving to add the most value was a fight. It wasn't easy, because it's easier to take pride in bricks and mortar, because you just see that building, you go there every day. Another topic we've kind of encountered over time is the more specialized people are, the less general knowledge they have. So you will have specialists, and if one specialist on holiday, there's not many other people who can pick it up. In the past, somebody else could have picked it up because it's a broad knowledge that they had. So that is something we needed to work on. And oh, sorry, thank you, great. And I've been talking about business partnering a lot, but what did we see, of course? If we take them away from the business physically, there was a disconnect to the operational colleagues at first. So there was a massive challenge doing the two things at the same time, centralizing and business partnering. Wow, that was a tough job. We did get there in the end, but it takes time. And interestingly enough, like on the last slide, I did talk about how we came together as a finance team and how we actually had an identity. And now I have a point on here saying there's more potential for friction between the finance team, within the finance team. How is that? In the past, if everybody is like spread out geographically and they just do their own thing, nobody else is going to actually challenge them on what they're doing. If they are now centrally and you work on something that is related to something else, because let's face it, if one person works on the balance sheet, the other one on the P&L, there is an overlap, and this can lead to friction. So there was another challenge. So keep those things in mind if you want to do a centralization. Financially, definitely worthwhile. There is a lot of upsides, but I would be lying if I would be saying there's no downsides. Good. Then I said that in the introduction at the beginning as well, one little vehicle I've used actually to implement the vision was to link it to the core values. I'm pretty sure you all work for decently sized businesses, so most likely you do have corporate values, which I also believe are very, very important. But quite often corporate values are fairly meaningless. If I ask you today, like, how many corporate values do you have? 7. Can you name them? Well, I'm not really sure, because they are not filled with life. So what you should be doing is, or what we have been doing and what really helped me, is to link the values from the company to the finance team's everyday's life. So what we've done is, we sat down together, I've asked my teams, like, okay, so integrity, what does that mean to you? Specifically, not in general as a person, specifically in your function. So for example, and that's just one example because we had a few, but one of them was in finance, we don't book anything that's against good accounting practices to enhance the results. Because you will see your colleagues coming to you, it's like, well, could you maybe like release that accrual? No, we still do need that accrual. That's against good practices, that's my integrity. Don't question my integrity, don't do that to me. So that was quite useful because you fill it with life, you fill it with examples how when people actually were acting against integrity. And once you fill it with examples in life, people will also remember what you have been talking about and gives them a bit of guidance. And you can link it to your vision if you have one. Just another example which my team struggled with at the beginning, customer focus. What does it mean? Like, I don't deal with customers, I'm an accountant. Like, why should I be customer centric? don't get it. Well, maybe first of all, define who's your internal customer. If you don't speak to the customer who's buying a car, but you do speak to your operational colleagues, and they are your customer. So what we've tried to do, or what we came up with, is in finance we work on problems together with our operational colleagues, and you can see how this links in with a vision. So for me, this came quite handy to actually say it's not just a finance topic to have this vision of business partnering, it also links quite well with our values. And then ultimately, because it is easy to forget, those mantras that we've just talked about, put them, if you do have a presentation master for your business or for your finance team, put them in there so that they're always reminded, just a little chart with a few values, put them in your signature, put your vision in your signature of your emails. It's not that people actively read it all the time, but it's present, they're aware of it, and it doesn't disappear. It's not, oh yeah, well, we came up with some corporate values and we'll never talk about it again. That's my take on values. And then ultimately, I would like to talk about how to strike a balance with your board. And how is this linked to business partnering? Ultimately, we've been talking about now transforming your your finance team into business partners. But at the beginning, I said it's also a journey for yourself. You also need to open up yourself. You need to be open to try to be the best business partner you can be for the business. And as I said in my vision, it is about adding value. So how can I, as a CFO, as an FD, group financial controller, whatever you are, how can I add most to the business? And why is this so difficult sometimes in the boardrooms? I'm sure when you read this and you see, boardrooms are often competitive and sometimes confrontational, I guess you've all experienced that before, because it's a lot of alphas, a lot of interesting personalities, strong personalities, who don't like being told no. And they may have been successful in their life because they usually don't get told no. So what I always find, let's take a little example. So your sales director is presenting something in a board meeting saying, I have this great project idea. We can transform our sales process to being paperless. And at the end, there's a hefty price tag to it. You're the CFO. Obviously, you are in charge of deciding then if this should be implemented or not. First, you need to understand where your colleague is coming from. Are they really passionate about it? Is it something they believe in? Or is it just that they can't be told no? Is it a pride thing? So if it's a pride thing, for example, never discuss any of this in the boardroom meetings. Just say, that's a really interesting approach. I would like to talk to you afterwards and understand it a bit more. Let's take that offline. That takes this whole I could lose my face element away from it. So you do need to understand how they are working to actually strike a compromise or find a solution to it. But also, you need to understand yourself. Why am I saying that? You need to put your ego aside. Because sometimes, just like our operational colleagues, we think more with our ego than we think of what's best for the business. I'm sure you've had it before that a director or a colleague who has wronged you in the past is presenting something to you, you're not even listening. It's like, hate this guy. I'm not going to prove that, obviously. But maybe he or she has a great point. Maybe it is a great idea. And just because you have been hurt by them in the past or whatever they've done to you, you need to put this aside, put your ego aside. You're being paid to add value to the business. You're not being paid for being petty. And it's very much easier said than done, because we are all emotional. We sit in these meetings and it can get heated, but try to put it aside, try to calm down. You know the 24-hour rule. If somebody upsets you, give it 24 hours before you respond to it. And quite often we have to admit, well, actually, it is a very great idea, because nobody wants an arm wrestling in the boardroom. That's also why I chose the picture. You don't want to do that. It's not helping the business. I honestly believe you should always open to compromise. So, for example, if they're saying, well, I want to spend another 100K on it, and you say, well, we simply don't have the budget. So the easy answer would be computer says no, right? Topic closed, let's move on. Or you could sit down, try to understand it, say, well, it does sound really good. Do you think you can find something else in your budget to save that money, and then actually you could compensate for it? Or maybe you could compensate half of it and I'll find the other half for you somewhere else. Stay open to compromises unless somebody is really going against your integrity. Never compromise on something, as I said earlier, oh, well, we could just release some accruals that you need. Don't ever do that. Never, like, in my opinion, integrity is something that can't be compromised on. That's a clear no. There's not much of a discussion about it, and this should be a stand your ground on that. But ultimately, what I want to say as well is I've seen a lot of CFOs and FDs who actually always want to please everyone. So they know it's not a good idea. We're going to spend 100,000 on that and we will get, what, 5 grand in return. Quite often they knew it's not a good idea, but they didn't want to upset someone. And it takes a lot of mental power. But if you have really considered the options, if you've sat down with your colleagues, if you've listened to them and they feel heard, you're also okay to say no. You're not there to please the other characters, you're there to add value to the business. And I can tell you from my own experience, people respect you for saying no, but only if you have listened to them beforehand, because then you can tell them why you're saying no. Well, that was my journey on how to become business partner as a function and also for myself. I hope this was interesting for you and maybe you have a few questions for me as well.
Thanks, Tim. I think that was really insightful, actually, and really commend you on the structure of the way that you've effectively put together a playbook, hasn't he, on how you can manage change. But would love to take some questions from you now. Anybody got any questions? Aha, brilliant.
Well, to be very honest, I started that journey before I became a CFO. So I started it as head of financial controlling, which was 3 years ago. And I would say it takes roughly 2 years. So I think what we quite often do when we start a big project, we have high expectations. We put a new manager into a new position and we think half a year later everything should be changed. I think that we're talking here about a cultural change. I would say 2 years.
How did you deal with the operational disconnect, the fact that you weren't out in the dealerships or your finance team weren't out in the dealerships?
Well, creating as many touch points as possible. So you can overcome the distance. That's really not the problem at all. But you need to make sure it is structured. So what we found at the beginning is that then everybody was central. They didn't speak to their operational colleagues anymore. So you need to foster that. And it was a big challenge. Like at the beginning, sometimes I had to set up the meetings to make sure that they are talking to their operational colleagues. And then they, at some point, the operational colleagues saw the benefit of it, and then they took the lead, and then the finance team followed as well. So it's self-perpetuating if it actually does work. So that's something I would recommend, push for it at the beginning.
Did you move to virtual meetings at that point, or had you recreated some sort of day in, day
Yes.
per week or fortnight?
Pretty much that. So that was before the pandemic. So we physically moved to a different location. And one of the reasons was also we didn't want the operations to put pressure on the finance team to do something which is against their integrity, because we have seen that a lot. It's like, well, the car wasn't really delivered, but will be delivered tomorrow. Can we just still get it in the month? Like, no, you can't. So that was one of the reasons. So that pressure was taken away, which was good. But yes, we set up like virtual meetings, and most of the things are small touch points, very quick touch points. It's not making sure that you're like, oh yeah, we've booked this 2-hour meeting. And it was not only on the finance side, the meetings, but also make sure if you have your weekly sales meeting on site, invite your financial controller to it. They happily join, they can do something in the meantime as well, because that's the beauty of working remotely. If it's not super of interest for you, you can still work, which I find perfect.
Great. Yeah, another question.
Tim, you mentioned that your team will continue to be virtual even after the pandemic. And you've also talked to us about cultural change. What advice have you got for people trying to embed culture through a remote environment?
I would say try to make it fun and easy, because I see a lot when we talk about corporate values or culture, it is very dry, right? One thing we've done when we talked about bringing those values to life was we had a big finance team meeting, and we had breakout groups where everybody could say, like, okay, you 5 people talk about this value and come up with examples. It's about including them, because it is their culture, it's not your culture. And if you ask your team, most of your people would like a better culture. So it is in their own interest. We also set something up which we call the FNC Forum, where they meet monthly, and it's just purely operated by themselves. So there's no management there, but they come back with a list afterwards and say, like, we've talked about it, and I think we can enhance these 4 steps. So really make them part of the journey and make it their journey, not yours.
Okay. One more question, yeah.
We are at the start of this transformation journey, and within 8 months, in our journey, we've gone from very traditional sit in the corner finance team to being very central with BI tools being introduced in. But for small companies, we actually have a really big group of directors, some of whom are starting to think that finance is getting a little bit too involved.
Okay.
What would your advice be in that situation?
Well, I've seen that as well, because as I said earlier, I've been told before, like, oh, you've never sold a car. How can you tell me to save on the discount we give to the customers? You wouldn't know. I think it is all about relationship building, and this is why the strong interpersonal skills are so important, because only if you earn their trust, they will work with you. Because I've seen it so many times in my life, hierarchy is less important than actually a relationship with a person. So try to build more relationships if you can, and encourage your team to build the relationships, because it's not a one-person show.
Right, thanks, Tim. I know